Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachos, page 13b, top of the page, with the words Lahaktir. Lahaktir levoinas lamachor b'yosem Omer pasol vein boikoris Omer ish logish Omer hayom Rabbi Yossi ein matir mipagel es hamatir. The Mishnah teaches that if one remove the handful from a meal offering with the intent to burn its frankincense on the next day, Rabbi Yossi says that the meal offering is unfit, but partaking of it does not include liability to receive karet. Concerning this, Reish Lakish says, Rabbi Yossi would say, meaning this is Rabbi Yossi's reasoning, a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul. In other words, if while performing the rites of a permitting factor, one had intent to perform the rites of a different permitting factor outside its designated time, the offering is not rendered pigul on account of this intent. V'chein omer v'shnei bezicha levoina shel nechem aponim she'emativ v'hageles amativ. Reish Lakish adds, and you would say the same with regard to the two bowls of frankincense of the showbread, that a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul, and therefore if the priest burned one of the bowls with the intent to burn the other bowl the next day, the showbread is not rendered pigul. My v'chein ata omer ma'odetim etam der Yossi v'levoina mishum delav mina debinchahi al mishne v'zicha levoina debina de'adadi dinu ema mifali adadi kamashmalan. The Gemara asks, what is the purpose of the apparently superfluous statement? And you would say the same with regard to the two bowls of frankincense. Is there reason to assume that Rabbi Yossi would hold that the showbread is rendered pigul in such a case? The Gemara responds that it is necessary, lest you say that the reason that Rabbi Yossi holds that there is no pigul in the case of the frankincense is because it is not of the same type as a meal offering. But with regard to the two bowls of frankincense, which are of the same type as each other, one might say that they do render one another pigul. Therefore, Reish Lakish teaches us that in both instances, one permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul. Okay. Mi matzis amaretama Rabbi Yossi v'levoina la bishum delalbina debinchahi yorgazani seif amru lo ma shinzamin hazevach amrahen hazevach damo uvisaro veimu ravechad levoina eina min mincha. The Gemara asks, and you can say it, the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yossi in the case of the frankincense in the Mishnah is not due to the fact that the frankincense is not of the same type as a meal offering, but isn't it taught in the latter clause of the Mishnah that the rabbis said to Rabbi Yossi, in what manner does the frankincense differ from an animal offering, where if one slaughtered it with the intent to sacrifice the portions consumed on the altar the next day, it is pigul. And Rabbi Yossi said to the rabbis, there is a difference. As in the case of an animal offering, its blood and its flesh and its portions consumed on the altar are all one entity, but the frankincense is not part of the meal offering. The Mishnah indicates that according to Rabbi Yossi, the reason the meal offering is not pigul is because the frankincense is not of the same type as the meal offering. Mai eino mina mincha, eino be'ikuv mincha delav ki hechi dema'akev lehu komet l'shiraim dicham delav miskatar komet lo mitacheli shiraim hachadami me'akev la levona אלא אי בוי היי מקטה ברשת באי בוי Hi, Maktar Vareshi. The Gemara explains what does Rabbi Yossi mean when he says that the frankincense is not part of the meal offering. He means that it is not part of the preclusion of the meal offering. The Gemara elaborates, this means that the halacha is not just. The halacha is not that just as the handful precludes the remainder, meaning that as long as the handful is not burned, the remainder may not be consumed. So too the handful precludes the frankincense from being burned upon the altar. Rather, if the priest wants, he burns this first, and if he wants to, he burns that first. He can choose whatever he wants to burn first, meaning he may burn the frankincense before or after the burning of the handful. Accordingly, the frankincense is an independent permitting factor. For this reason, intent with regard to the frankincense that occurred during the removal of the handful does not render a meal offering pigul. The Gemara asks, and the rabbis who say that the meal offering is rendered pigul in such a case, what's their opinion? The Gemara responds, they hold that when we say that a permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pigul, this is with regard to the case taught in Mishnah 16a concerning one who slaughtered one of the limbs whose sacrifice permits the consumption of the 2 loaves meal offering brought on Shavuot with the intent to partake of the other limb the next day. The Gemara elaborates, when you said in the Mishnah that both permitting factors are fit, this statement applies only where they were not fixed in one vessel. But in a situation where they were fixed in one vessel, as is the case with regard to the handful and the frankincense, they are considered like one unit, and therefore they render one another pigul. Amar Rabbi Yanai, Likut, Levona Bezar Pasul, my time. Amar Rabbi Yanai, Mishum Halacha, Nigaoba, Kasav Halacha. Excuse me. Amar Rabbi Yanai, Mishum Halacha, Nigaoba, Kasav Halacha, Shulam Beregel, Shmab Halacha, Halacha Gazar, Psula. With regard to frankincense, Rabbi Yanai says the collection of frankincense from the meal offering when performed by non-priests is not valid and disqualifies the meal offering. The Gemara asks, what is the reason? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, it is because the right of conveying has touched it. Meaning, the collection of frankincense is considered part of the right of the conveying of the frankincense to the altar for the purpose of burning, even if the non-priest simply collected the frankincense and thereafter transferred it to a priest. Rabbi Yanai holds that conveying even without moving one's leg is called conveying, and the halacha is that the performance of the right of conveying by a non-priest is not valid. Amar Mari Afanan Nami Tanina Zeaklan Kol HaKomes V'Nosim Bichli V'Hamolech V'Maktiom. Rav Mari said, we learned this halacha in the Mishnah in 12a, which discusses those sacrificial rites of a meal offering during which improper intent renders an offering pigul. As well, the Mishnah teaches this is the principle. In the case of anyone who removes the handful or places the handful in the vessel, or who conveys the vessel with the handful to the altar, or one who burns the handful on the altar with the intent to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, or to burn an item whose typical manner is such that one burns it on the altar outside its designated area, the meal offering is unfit, but there is no liability for karet. If his intent was to perform any of these actions beyond their designated time, the offering is pigul, and one is liable to receive the karet on account of it, provided that the permitting factor, meaning the handful, was sacrificed in accordance with its mitzvah. Ramari analyzes the first part of the Mishnah. Granted, the removal of the handful from a meal offering is the same as or meaning equivalent to the slaughter of animal offering, is the conveying of the handful to the altar in order to burn it. It is also the same as the conveying of the blood of a slaughtered offering to the altar in order to sprinkle it. Similarly, the burning of the handful and frankincense of a meal offering is comparable to the sprinkling of the blood of a slaughtered offering upon the altar. But as for placing the handful in the service vessel, what rite he is performing it, that is comparable to a rite of slaughtered offerings. Ka shakil rami. Okay. If we say that the meal offering is pigul because the placing the handful into a vessel is comparable to the collection of the blood of a slaughtered offering into a service vessel, one can ask, are these rites in fact comparable? There, in the case of animal offerings, the blood enters the vessel by itself, whereas here, the priest takes the handful from the meal offering and casts it into the vessel. Right? Okay. Ela mishum de kevin lo sagile de lo abad la avoid khashubihi al kol khaykh mishabile ke gavala khanami kevin lo sagile de lo avile avoid khashubihi al kol khaykh mishabile ki hola. Rather, it must be due to the following reason. Since it is not possible to sacrifice the handful without performing the act of placing it in a vessel, the placement of the handful in a vessel is considered a significant rite, and perforce this factor causes it to be considered like the collection of the blood. Here, too, with regard to the collection of frankincense, since it is not possible to sacrifice the frankincense without first performing the act of collecting it from the vessel, the collection of the frankincense is a significant rite that perforce causes it to be considered like the rite of conveying. No, I don't know. Hacha kashakil virami. The Gemara rejects the suggestion. No, this is not the reason, and one cannot prove from the Mishnah that the collection of the frankincense from a meal offering performed by a non-priest is not valid. Actually, the reason why intent during the placement of the handful renders the offering pigul is in fact because it is comparable to the collection of the blood of a slaughtered offering, and as for the difficulty raised there the blood enters the vessel by itself, whereas here he takes the handful from the meal offering and casts it into the vessel. This is not a true difficulty. Mechti, let's see, not considered necessary value kedushas. Kli hu mali b'meila mali kashakel rami. The Gemara explains now consider both of them, meaning the collection of the blood and the placing of the handful involve the sanctity of a vessel in which a service vessel sanctifies a permitting factor onto the altar, either the handful or the blood. What difference is it to me if the permitting factor enters the vessel by itself or whether one takes the item and casts it into the vessel? Now we go to Mishnah, the new Mishnah. We finish that new Mishnah. Shachash kevasim lechol achas melachalos lemachar hektir shneim bezichin lechol echad melasedarim lemachar bios yomer. Also, Chalavi also said there Shechishab Ala Bigov Chayva Nalav Karis. And Shini Pastel by Karis. One was there Bigov Chayva Nalav Karis. That's the Mishnah. And then, nice. Okay, that's the Mishnah. I'm going to pause for just a moment. The Mishnah. Okay, that was the Mishnah, and now we proceed to the Talmud. Is that the Mishnah? Yeah. Zag de Talmud, Zamar Funa, Omer Haya Rabbi Yossi, Pigel B'Yerech Shel Yamin, Lonis. I wonder why it says Omer Haya Rabbi Yossi instead of Rabbi Yossi Haya Omer. It's different. Omer Haya Rabbi Yossi is a little bit different. Wonder why. Anyway, okay. Pigel B'Yerech Shel Yamin, Lonis Pagel Ayerech Shel Small My Tema. Iboy Sema Safara. Iboy Sema Krab. Okay. Whereas Rav Huna says, Rav Yossi would say, in accordance with his opinion, that the intent of Pigul with regard to one loaf or one arrangement does not render the second loaf or arrangement Pigul, that if one had intent of Pigul with regards to the right thigh, in other words, he slaughtered an offering with intent to partake of the right thigh the next day, then the left thigh has not become Pigul, and one is not liable to receive credit for its consumption. What is the reason for this? If you wish, propose a logical argument, and if you wish, cite a verse. If you wish to propose a logical argument, Lo adifa machshava b'maaseh atuma ilu itami chad ever min atami lekule v'yosema kra b'nefesh acheres mimenu ona avuna tisa mimenu v'lo chaver. Rav Huna elaborates, if you wish, propose a logical argument, disqualifying. This is a logical argument, okay? And this is what it would be. Disqualifying intent is no stronger than the incident of ritual impurity. And if one limb of an offering becomes impure, did not the entire offering then become impure? Accordingly, one limb can be rendered pigul without the other. If you wish, cite a verse that addresses pigul, and the soul that eats of it shall bear his iniquity. Leviticus 7:18. The verse indicates that one who eats specifically of it for one part shall bear his iniquity, and not one who eats from the other part of the offering. Okay. Ein boy kares ad she pagel bestehen in achas mehen la. Nachman raised an objection to Rav Huna from Breita, and the rabbis say that there is never liability to receive karet for partaking of the two loaves unless one has intent of pigul with regard to an olive bulk of both of them. In other words, one's intent renders both loaves pigul only if he slaughters the lambs with the intent to consume an amount equal to an olive bulk from both loaves combined outside the proper time. One can infer from this that if he had intent with regard to both of them, yes, both loaves are pigul, but if his intent was with regard to only one of them, no, the other loaf is not pigul. Mani Rav Nachman continues in accordance with whose opinion is his brisa. Mani, who is his brisa like? Ilay Rabbanan afilu b'yachas mihan nami afilu ela pshit Rav Yossi imar b'shlama chad gufahu mishum hakim sarei. Rav Nachman continues in accordance with whose opinion is a brisa. If we say that it is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis of the Mishnah, then even if his intent was with regard to only one of them, both loaves are rendered pigul. Rather, it is obvious that the brisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yossi. Now, if you say that according to Rav Yossi, left and right thighs of an offering are considered one body, and consequently pigul intent with regard to one thigh renders the other thigh pigul as well. Due to that reason, it is understandable that the pigul intent was for an amount equal to one olive bulk from both loaves. Then the intent with regard to each loaf is combined with the other. Be continued on next Daf.